time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The pen touched the page for only seconds, but what followed carried the weight of years of royal conflict. Prince William had reached the decision that many inside the family once believed would never come. The final decree was signed. Prince Harry's Duke title was formally removed, and a relationship already fractured by distance, accusation, and distrust suddenly crossed into territory from which there could be no simple return. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not celebrate. He sat with the decree in front of him, reading the final paragraph again before placing the pen beside the page. The decree, a formal written order declaring an official royal decision, did more than change a style of address. For Harry, the Duke title had become tied to his marriage, public identity, former place among working royals, and the sense that however distant he became, some formal connection to the institution remained. The prince knew exactly what that meant. Before signing, he paused over the language declaring the decision final, remembering not a rival or a headline, but his younger brother. That was what made the moment so cold. The document did not speak in anger. It simply closed a door. When an aide reached to collect it, William kept one hand on the page for 1 extra second, then released it without a word. Harry received confirmation in private. He read the notice once, then again, but said nothing. The silence carried disbelief, humiliation, and the realization that this was no longer a threat designed to force change. The order had already been signed. More painfully, its wording made clear that reconciliation alone would not automatically restore what had been taken away. Then another detail surfaced. Attached to the decree was a restricted palace memorandum, an internal note intended for limited circulation inside the royal household, showing the decision had been prepared long before the signature. William had been reviewing the path toward this outcome while maintaining public silence. That discovery changed the moment. Harry was not reacting only to sudden punishment. He was confronting the possibility that his brother had been moving toward this conclusion for many long months. The signature explained what happened, but still not why. Somewhere behind the formal language, sealed memorandum, and final movement of the pen was a personal breaking point. To understand why William could sign such a devastating order, the story has to move away from the decree itself and toward the two brothers, whose private history made that single signature so painfully personal. That unanswered question now pulled the story away from the signed page and toward the two men trapped behind it. William and Harry had once carried the same grief, survived the same scrutiny, and learned how lonely royal life could become, even inside a crowded palace. Now one brother was moving steadily toward the throne, while the other had just watched one of his last formal connections to that world disappear. William felt the contradiction more sharply because his position had changed. As heir to the throne, the person next in line to become monarch, he was expected to think beyond private emotion and protect the stability of the institution he would one day lead. Harry remained his brother, but he was no longer a working royal carrying daily duties on behalf of the crown. That difference mattered, because every unresolved conflict could eventually become William's responsibility, rather than simply another family dispute. The prince remembered the years when he had defended Harry against criticism and tried to absorb some of the pressure surrounding him. Those memories made the decree harder, not easier. He could recall standing beside his younger brother when unity seemed natural. Yet now he had become the person who authorized the most painful institutional consequence Harry had faced. Duty had given him authority, but it had offered no protection from guilt. Harry carried the confirmation across the room and stopped beside Meghan without immediately speaking. For him, the Duke title had become far more than ceremonial wording. It was linked to his marriage, the public identity they had built together, and the royal status that had followed him even after stepping away from active duties. Losing it, therefore, felt less like surrendering a name and more like hearing that his place in William's future had been formally reduced. Then Harry finally looked at her. "Did he really sign it himself?" he asked. Meghan hesitated before answering, and that brief silence told him everything. She had seen the same confirmation. William had not simply approved a recommendation from a distance. His name stood on the final order, making the decision personal in a way Harry could not dismiss. The deeper shock came from what followed. A documented internal account attached to the Palace Review showed that the decision had not emerged from one explosive argument. The review had been active for months, and William had personally followed its progress while saying almost nothing publicly. Private communications had convinced him that unresolved tensions surrounding Harry could eventually collide with the responsibilities of his own reign. Harry now understood the decision had a history he had not fully seen. What he still did not know was the exact moment that turned William's hesitation into resolve. The brothers' pain explained the stakes, but the decisive break came from something far more specific. One confrontation behind closed palace doors that became the point of no return. Every family rupture has a moment after which the old relationship can never truly return. For William and Harry, that moment did not happen before cameras or beneath newspaper headlines. It happened during a private Windsor meeting, when a carefully arranged attempt at reconciliation collapsed into accusation, distrust, and one sentence that left William convinced the monarchy could no longer survive on promises alone. Charles had encouraged the meeting after months of strained communication, hoping both sons could finally draw a line between private family pain and future public conflict. Windsor mattered because it offered neutral ground away from formal ceremony, while the proposed confidentiality understanding, a written promise intended to keep private conversations from becoming public, was supposed to rebuild trust. William saw it as protection. Harry saw it as proof that his own family now treated him like a threat. Harry's frustration rose the moment the paper appeared between them. He looked at William, then back at the document, and the old tension returned almost instantly. To him, reconciliation could not begin with rules about what he was allowed to say. The prince tried to explain that private conversations needed boundaries if they were ever going to speak freely again. But Harry heard something colder. Procedure had entered the room before trust ever had. William's composure finally cracked when his brother accused him of caring more about protecting the institution than repairing their relationship. The words struck directly at the conflict he had been carrying for months. He wanted to remain a brother, but he was also moving closer to a future in which every family crisis could become a problem for the crown. Harry pushed harder, insisting that no palace agreement should control how he spoke about his own experiences. Then the decisive moment arrived. Harry pushed the unsigned paper back across the table and said that no royal document would decide what he was permitted to say about his own life. William stared at him for several seconds before answering quietly, "Then you are asking me to choose." According to the documented account later placed inside the internal review file, neither man raised his voice after that. They did not need to. Both understood something fundamental had changed. Harry stood and left without signing anything. The prince remained seated after the door closed, staring at the untouched paper between the empty chairs. He folded it once, placed it inside the red dispatch box, the secure case used to carry important royal papers, and immediately called for a senior aide. William gave one instruction: reopen the dormant review of Harry's continuing ceremonial status, and return with final options rather than temporary solutions. That was the trigger. The decree had not begun with a signature. It had begun with a choice. The Windsor meeting created the fracture, but the next encounter would strip away restraint entirely, forcing two brothers to say aloud what years of protocol had kept buried. When William and Harry finally stood face to face again, there were no cameras, no public statements, and no carefully prepared speeches to protect them. The argument began quietly, almost painfully controlled. Then years of resentment broke through. Harry demanded to know whether his brother truly intended to erase his title, while William confronted him with the cost of repeatedly challenging the institution they had both inherited. Harry had come because the internal review had moved beyond discussion and into a draft decree. That mattered, because a draft decree was no longer a warning. It was a near-final written order waiting for approval. Charles had deliberately stayed away, leaving his sons without a referee. The king knew that any intervention from him could turn a personal confrontation into another argument over loyalty, favoritism, and control. William kept his voice low at first. He told Harry the decision was not revenge and not punishment for disobedience. It was about trust, responsibility, and the stability of the crown. Harry rejected that immediately. He accused his brother of hiding personal anger behind future kingship, using royal authority to settle something that should have remained between them as family. The prince pushed back harder. He said every attempt to preserve a private relationship had eventually become tangled with public conflict, leaks, interviews, and renewed suspicion. Harry answered that royal silence had repeatedly made him feel disposable, as though the institution could close ranks and leave him outside whenever his version of events became uncomfortable. Neither man moved closer. Every sentence widened the space between them. Then William said the words Harry had not expected to hear. The decree had already passed the final internal review stage. Only his signature remained. Harry stared at him, stunned. He had believed there was still room to negotiate, still time to pull the process backward. Instead, the machinery had almost finished moving without him. He asked whether Charles could stop it. William did not answer immediately. That hesitation carried more weight than any speech. Harry understood that their father had effectively chosen not to intervene. The king might not have written the order, but he was not standing in its way either. Harry rose from his chair and moved toward the door. William watched him go and finally said, "If you walk out now, understand what happens next." Harry stopped and turned. A long silence followed before the prince added, "You leave me no other choice." The confrontation exposed the brothers' emotional war, but it also raised a more dangerous question. William could threaten the final step only because someone had already placed real authority in his hands. Behind the anger stood a quieter transfer of power, and that transfer would explain why the signature was no longer just symbolic. The most consequential part of William's decision was not the anger behind it. It was the authority. Somewhere between Charles's exhaustion with the family conflict and William's growing responsibility for the monarchy's future, the balance had shifted. Harry was no longer arguing only with his brother. He was confronting the man increasingly expected to protect the crown from whatever he believed could threaten its stability. Charles had already authorized William to oversee the final review of Harry's ceremonial standing. That review was the formal process deciding how his remaining royal status would be treated inside palace structures, and the authorization meant the heir could approve and sign the concluding decree. The monarch still remained sovereign, but this decision mattered because it touched directly on the kind of discipline William would one day be expected to enforce in his own reign. The king felt the weight of that choice alone. He read the final recommendation slowly, knowing the consequences would reach far beyond protocol. One son would be given the power to impose a permanent loss on the other, and Charles understood that allowing it would change the balance inside the family forever. Protecting the monarchy suddenly meant refusing to protect Harry from the decision itself. William carried a different burden. Signing the decree meant accepting that future kingship could demand choices he would never have made simply as a brother. He had spent years trying to separate personal hurt from institutional responsibility, but now the two had collided. The prince could either step away and leave the matter unresolved, or accept the authority already placed in his hands. Charles finally spoke to him in private. According to the documented palace account attached to the review, he told William that responsibility meant living with difficult decisions instead of continually sending them back to the sovereign. The king would not overrule the recommendation. He would not rescue either son from the consequences of where the conflict had reached. Then William noticed something even colder inside the file. The decree did not only remove Harry's public-facing title, it also stripped his name from several internal ceremonial references, meaning future palace arrangements would no longer treat him as occupying the same formal position he once held. The change was deeper than the headline. Charles removed his reading glasses and set them beside the papers. William waited across the desk without speaking. After several seconds, the king pushed the folder toward him instead of taking it back. That movement settled everything. Power had passed from hesitation into action. Once the file left Charles's hands, the debate was effectively over. And before Harry could fully absorb what the signature meant emotionally, the machinery around his former royal position had already begun changing without him. The decree was only one page, but its consequences spread through the palace with brutal efficiency. Names changed, lists were revised, invitations were reconsidered. References that had existed for years suddenly disappeared. For Harry, the most painful realization was not simply that William had signed the order, it was that the royal system had already begun adjusting to a future in which his old title no longer existed. Harry felt the change most sharply when a revised formal communication arrived without the ducal styling that had followed his name for years. Ceremonial material, internal correspondence rules, seating documents, and future palace references had all been updated to match the decree. Those changes mattered because they drew a hard line between his permanent family connection by birth and the official royal position he had once carried in public life. Blood remained, rank did not. Harry read the communication twice. Then he folded it, paused, and opened it again, as though the missing words might somehow return. Meghan watched without interrupting. She understood that his anger was only the surface. The deeper wound came from seeing another part of the life they had once occupied together, formally closed off, not through an argument, but through quiet administrative changes that offered no emotion and no room for negotiation. The silence broke when he looked at her and said, "They didn't waste any time." Meghan reached for the paper, but Harry kept hold of it. He was not only reading a new form of address, he was watching the palace prove that the decision had already moved beyond William's signature and into daily reality. Then, another detail made the loss even harder to dismiss. A scheduled royal event quietly removed Harry from a ceremonial placement that had previously been preserved, while the review remained unresolved. The adjustment showed that palace teams had prepared for implementation before the wider public understood how far the decree would reach. What had seemed like one title was now affecting where his name appeared, how he would be addressed, and where he would no longer stand. William received confirmation that the changes were complete, but relief never came. Instead of asking whether the process had finished cleanly, the prince asked whether Harry had personally been informed of every immediate change. That question revealed the burden he still carried. He had enforced the decision, but he did not want his brother discovering its consequences through strangers or headlines. The machinery had moved. The old reality was already disappearing. Yet the emotional story was not finished. Because once rank, title, and procedure had been stripped away, William and Harry still had to face the one question no decree could answer: whether anything personal remained between them. The turning point did not arrive through another decree. It came in a room with no aides, no secretaries, and no documents waiting to be signed. William and Harry met privately one final time, after the title had already been removed. Neither could bargain with the outcome now. For the first time, there was nothing left to debate except the damage between two brothers who had spent years speaking through institutions. Harry understood that the decree could no longer be used as leverage, and William knew the same. With implementation complete, the meeting was no longer about reversing a royal decision. It was about what survived after it. No palace officials, legal advisors, or family intermediaries were present, which meant neither man could hide behind procedure, rank, or someone else's carefully chosen words. Harry spoke first. He told William that losing the title was painful, but believing his brother actually wanted him gone was worse. The prince answered that he had never wanted Harry erased from the family. What he no longer trusted was the royal role itself, because every unresolved dispute had begun to carry consequences for the institution he would one day lead. William then admitted something Harry had not expected. According to the documented account of their private conversation, he had resisted removing the title during earlier stages of the review and delayed the final recommendation more than once. The decision had not always been inevitable. That mattered because Harry had convinced himself the process had been designed from the beginning to push him out. Harry's anger softened, but it did not disappear. He admitted that years of suspicion had changed how he interpreted almost everything his brother did. Even silence felt hostile. Even caution felt like rejection. William answered that signing the decree had hurt precisely because their shared childhood made the decision personal. The future king could separate duty from emotion on paper, but he could not erase what the choice meant between them. Then Harry asked the only question that still mattered. "Do you still consider me your brother?" William did not hesitate. "That was never the title I was taking away." No handshake followed. Harry simply nodded, looked down for a moment, then moved toward the door. William called his name, not the title that had disappeared, not a formal style, just Harry. He stopped before leaving. That moment did not repair everything. It did something quieter. It separated family from rank. But outside those walls, no such separation existed. Newspapers, broadcasters, crowds, and critics were already turning the decree into a global judgment on both men, and the private understanding they had finally reached was about to be swallowed by the public storm. By morning, a private family punishment had become a global royal earthquake. The words were impossible to soften. Harry's duke title was gone, and William had signed the final decree himself. Supporters called it discipline. Critics called it vengeance. Yet beneath every argument was the same extraordinary image. The future king formally severing one of the last ceremonial bonds, connecting his younger brother to the institution they inherited together. Harry watched the coverage long enough to realize the story had already moved beyond the decree. British and international broadcasters were treating the decision as both a family rupture and a signal of how William might approach loyalty, discipline, and public duty in the years ahead. Palace communications stayed cold and controlled, stressing that the process was complete rather than discussing emotion. That contrast only made the public reaction louder. Harry stayed with the broadcast until the discussion shifted toward whether he still belonged emotionally within the royal family. Then he switched it off. The title had already been removed, but hearing strangers turn his relationship with William into a public verdict felt different. One decision had become a judgment on his place as a son, brother, and royal figure all at once. William reacted just as strongly to a different kind of coverage. Headlines presented him as victorious, decisive, even triumphant. The prince hated that framing. Privately, he saw the decree as evidence that reconciliation had failed, not proof that he had won. Authority had increased around him, but the personal cost had grown with it. Then commentators began focusing on the signature itself. They argued that William's direct role showed the monarchy entering a new phase in which the heir was exercising unusually visible internal power. The palace did not challenge that interpretation. By remaining silent, It allowed another message to settle in public. Blood relationship and official royal status were no longer guaranteed to remain connected. Outside Buckingham Palace, that message became painfully human. A crowd gathered near the gates as newspaper vendors held up a front page dominated by William's photograph, beneath the headline, "The Final Signature." One visitor kept the paper open, while another looked at it and quietly said, "Whatever happened between them, that is still his brother." The sentence captured what official statements could not. Public opinion could decide who seemed strong and who seemed defeated, but the deeper meaning of the decree could not be measured by headlines alone. William had gained authority. Harry had lost formal status. The crown had drawn a harder boundary around itself. The world had already chosen its story, but the final verdict belonged to the human cost behind the signature. In the end, the decree did exactly what it was designed to do. Harry's Duke title was removed. William accepted responsibility for the decision. Charles allowed it to stand. The palace moved forward. But the true consequence could never be measured by altered letterheads or ceremonial lists. The signature marked the moment when two brothers finally admitted that family love and royal duty were no longer capable of occupying the same space in the same way. Harry accepted that the title was not coming back. The decree remained final, and the palace now treated the matter as settled. That mattered because the argument had moved beyond emotion into permanent royal structure. His family connection by birth remained untouched, but the institutional status that once tied him to official royal life had been removed. Fighting it now would only keep him emotionally trapped inside the system he had spent years trying to leave behind. William carried a different kind of loss. He had protected the boundaries of the crown, but there was no satisfaction in it. The prince emerged with greater authority and a clearer idea of how he intended to handle duty in the future. Family membership alone could not guarantee an official role when trust had broken down. Yet every step toward that clarity had changed his relationship with the brother who shared so much of his early life. Charles understood the meaning just as deeply. By refusing to reverse William's decision, the king had allowed a painful generational handover to happen in real time. The future monarch was no longer simply preparing for responsibility. He was beginning to define the standards of the reign that would eventually follow, even when those standards demanded choices that cut directly through the family. The greatest irony now became impossible to ignore. Removing Harry's title weakened his formal connection to the monarchy, but it also stripped away the rank behind which so much of his identity had been hidden. William faced the opposite truth. He was no longer merely a brother caught inside a family dispute. He had shown himself capable of choosing institutional duty over personal sentiment. William later saw the signed decree inside the completed file. He did not reopen it. He closed the folder, placed it aside, and returned to his duties. Elsewhere, Harry put away the formal notice and walked out of the room without carrying it with him. Neither brother truly won. Harry lost a title that once defined his royal place. William preserved the authority of the crown, but paid for it with a bond that could never fully return to what it had been. The monarchy survived by drawing a harder boundary around itself, and the brothers survived by accepting that blood could remain permanent even when royal roles did not. There was nowhere further for the decree to go. The signature stood. The title was gone. William chose the crown's boundaries. Harry was forced beyond them, and both brothers walked away changed forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.